We often picture a certain kind of self-consciousness in kids, right? Maybe worrying about fitting in.
Yeah.
But a surprising detail from our latest deep dive into Indian schools. Government school students are significantly more likely to view being short as a bad look
Mm.
compared to their private school peers who are, more concerned about being fat.
It's fascinating, isn't it? How just one little observation like that, it really opens a door, an
Exactly.
entry point into understanding, well, the whole development of social and emotional skills in Indian schools.
So that's what we're tackling today.
Yes. Today, we're really embarking on a deep exploration of this comprehensive study. It's titled 2A 360-Degree Attitude Audit.pdf.
Okay.
And it's part of the bigger Cognitive and Affective Skills Study, CSS they call it.
Yep.
Think of this audit as, well, getting the full picture, attitudes of students, teachers, parents, everyone.
A 360-degree attitude audit? Okay, let's unpack that. It sounds huge,
Right.
really broad.
It is. And this study, it's genuinely remarkable. It's the first time anyone's done this kind of comprehensive measurement of attitudes across India's, incredibly diverse landscape.
Wow.
And the groundwork they did, it's immense. Reviewed over 500 articles, 45 books, looked at more than 80 existing tools.
That's some serious background research.
Absolutely. And here's where it gets really interesting. They found that a lot of the existing tools, often from, say, Western contexts, they just didn't quite fit the Indian reality, didn't capture the nuances.
Right.
So they actually took on the pretty significant task of developing their own social and emotional learning model and their own tools to measure it.
That's like a huge undertaking.
Oh.
So tell us more about this CASS model they created. What's it involve?
Well, the CADES model, it basically gives a framework for looking at holistic development. It has 4 key areas, or arms.
Okay.
Social and emotional skills themselves, obviously. Then positive attitudes, that's our focus today. A supportive school climate. And, of course, academic knowledge.
Makes sense.
But, crucially, it also recognizes how much the attitudes of teachers, principals, and parents influence the students. It's interconnected.
So it's looking at the whole ecosystem around the child,
Yeah.
not just the kid in isolation.
Precisely, yeah. The study itself happened in 2 main stages. Phase 1 was all about developing and validating these new tools, making sure they actually worked,
Right, testing them out.
Exactly. Then phase 2 was the big data collection, students, parents, teachers, government schools, private schools, across different states.
And what kinds of attitudes were they looking at?
Really crucial social topics, things like gender, caste, linguistic diversity, civic sense, citizenship, and attitudes towards people who are economically backward.
Big stuff.
Definitely. And to make sure everyone understood clearly, they developed the tools in multiple languages: English, Hindi, Telugu, Marathi, Odia, with really careful adaptation and translation processes.
That level of detail is impressive, seriously rigorous. So our initial point about bad looks, short versus fat, where does that fit into this model?
So that falls under the positive attitudes part of the CS model, specifically within the area they call attitude towards self.
Got it.
And our deep dive today, it's primarily focused on the findings from their specific attitude audit tool, which they just called ATT.
Okay, so attitude towards self is just one angle.
Yeah.
What other aspects of attitude did this ATT audit cover?
They also looked at attitudes towards significant others. That's your peers, parents, teachers.
Right.
Then there's attitude towards school-related tasks, how kids feel about learning, what they believe about intelligence, perseverance, different subjects, that sort of thing. And finally, they explored attitude towards social objects. That's where those really big societal factors come in: gender, caste, language, and so on.
Right, a truly comprehensive map of attitudes. Okay, let's go back to how students see themselves. Beyond the bad looks finding, what else did the study uncover there?
Well, when they asked students about what counts as bad student behavior, it was interesting. Government school students, both younger and older, they were more likely to include a wider range of things beyond just, say, getting low marks.
Like what?
Things like not finishing homework or getting negative feedback from parents. Those were seen as pretty significant issues too.
Okay.
Now, private school students, they also saw incomplete homework and parental feedback negatively, of course, but they put relatively less emphasis on the low grades themselves.
Huh. So what does that suggest?
It might suggest maybe a greater perceived pressure from home about academic performance, specifically in government schools, or perhaps different consequences.
That's a really interesting point. Could it be that the consequences of low marks just hit harder in those communities, maybe more is riding on it.
That's definitely a plausible interpretation. The study also asked about what students thought was improper behavior towards parents.
Okay, towards parents, what came up?
Disobeying parents when asked to study. That was number one across the board. Both school types, all ages, saw that as the most unacceptable.
Makes sense.
But as they got older, government school students increasingly saw complaining about parents to relatives or arguing about not getting new things as improper.
Ah, okay.
That trend wasn't quite as strong among the private school students. It could suggest maybe a strengthening sense of family responsibility or respect as they mature, specifically in that government school context.
It seems like different aspects of filial piety maybe are emphasized differently as they grow up in the two systems.
It could suggest that, yeah. Now, flipping it around teacher perceptions. What makes a bad teacher in their eyes?
Ah, interesting. Were the teachers aligned on this?
Actually, yes, quite a bit of agreement between government and private school teachers here.
Okay.
They both pointed to things like students not being able to explain concepts learned, low scores, students finding the subject boring. Those were key indicators for them.
So student understanding is paramount.
Seems like it. And interestingly, neither group put much importance on things like not being fun and popular or, students lacking respect sometimes.
Really?
Yeah. It suggests a shared professional value, maybe focused on student understanding and engagement with the actual subject matter.
So for teachers in both systems, it seems to be more about the learning process itself than about, say, personal popularity with the students. That's actually quite good to know.
It is.
Okay, let's shift gears to how students view their peers, that significant others category. What jumped out there?
One notable difference was how students said they'd react to a peer who bullies.
Right, bullying. Always a tough one.
Yeah. When it was serious bullying, private school students were considerably more likely to say reporting it was the right thing to do.
Okay.
Government school students, especially the older ones, showed a bit more inclination towards loyalty to friends, not reporting the behavior.
Loyalty versus reporting.
But then, if it was just minor teasing, government schoolgirls were actually more inclined to befriend the peer doing the teasing, though this decreased with age. The opposite was true in private schools.
Wow, that's complex.
Yeah.
Very nuanced depending on the situation and who you are.
Exactly. It shows how different school environments might shape responses to peer conflict in subtle ways.
So loyalty versus taking a stand against bad behavior, it's a tricky balance, and it looks like school type really plays a role in how kids navigate that. What about less serious stuff, like, harmless pranks?
Right, like throwing chalk or dusters, that kind of thing.
Yeah.
Here, private school students were somewhat divided on whether to report it. A fair number mentioned loyalty to friends as a reason not to.
Okay.
Government school students, though, they were more inclined to see reporting even these minor pranks as the right thing to do, especially as they got older.
Interesting. Why the difference, do you think?
Well, perhaps there's a different understanding of classroom norms, or maybe a stronger sense of responsibility to maintain order in the government school setting.
So maybe a bit more of an informal, let kids vibe in private schools for minor things, while government schools lean towards a stricter approach even for small disruptions.
Could be, yeah. Now, what about friendships based on academics? Willingness to befriend peers who are doing well or struggling.
Ah, yes. Does academic performance influence friendships?
This revealed some interesting social dynamics. The vast majority of students, actually, in both types of schools, said they would befriend someone struggling academically.
That's good.
And often they said it was because they wanted to help them study.
Nice.
However, a noticeable percentage, particularly boys and students in private schools, admitted they'd be hesitant. They
Wow.
worried it might negatively affect their own exam scores.
Okay. That pressure again.
Conversely, when asked about befriending high-achieving students, government school students were more likely to say yes because they thought their parents would approve.
Really, parental approval driving friendship choices.
It suggests that maybe parental expectations around who you associate with academically might be more pronounced or at least perceived that way in government school settings.
So it seems like academic performance plays a more explicit role in shaping friendship choices for some students, potentially driven by these different external pressures. Let's move on to attitudes towards parents. This has to be a really influential relationship.
Oh, absolutely. Huge. And one finding here was quite sobering.
Oh.
When asked about parents using corporal punishment,
Uh-oh.
a significant proportion of students across both school types and age groups actually express agreement with it,
Agreement.
often based on the belief that, well, parents only punish when children have actually done something wrong, that it's deserved.
Wow.
And this acceptance even tended to increase with age in many of the groups surveyed.
Yeah, that's a very significant finding with serious implications for child welfare.
It is.
What about when parents impose restrictions that teenagers might see as unfair, like controlling friendships?
Yeah, the study looked at that, specifically parents disapproving of a friend who is actually well-behaved and doing well academically.
Right, the unreasonable restriction.
Interestingly, there wasn't a strong consensus either way among students here. It suggests this is probably a complex personal issue for many kids,
Okay.
but a striking difference emerged when it came to parental negligence, defined in the study as parents never attending school events.
Right. How did students view that?
Government school students were far more likely to agree with friends who claimed that such parents didn't love or care for their child,
Really? That strongly?
much more so than private school students who largely disagreed with that interpretation.
Wow, that stark contrast.
Hmm.
It could reflect very different levels of parental involvement in school life, maybe, or just different cultural norms around how parental care is expressed or expected in those communities.
Exactly. It really highlights potentially different levels of connection or expectations of connection between home and school in these two systems.
Okay, now what about the other crucial, significant other in a student's school life? Their teachers. What were the attitudes there?
Well, students generally didn't like it when teachers seemed to favor certain students. That came across clearly.
And why did they think teachers favored students?
The common belief was that these favored students just had some kind of special ability.
Ah, okay. Not about effort, but innate ability.
Seems to be the perception. Now, regarding strict teachers, opinions were divided.
How so?
Some students felt, having fun in class was important. Others really prioritized the need for discipline.
Any patterns there?
Older students in private schools showed a slightly stronger preference for discipline, interestingly.
And what about making fun of teachers? Is that ever okay?
Again, varied responses. Some students, particularly younger ones, saw it as maybe a way to show power or react to how they felt the teacher was behaving.
Right.
But a larger proportion, especially older students, disagreed strongly. They emphasized respecting teachers as gurus.
That traditional respect still holds sway for many.
It seems so. And on a more positive note, the vast majority of students, in both school types, believed people become teachers because they genuinely want to teach.
Oh, that's good.
Yeah. Not primarily for the salary or the respect, but because of a desire to educate. It suggests an underlying appreciation for the profession itself.
It's interesting to see that core respect for the role of a teacher existing alongside, some of the more typical student grumbles or behaviors.
Oh, okay.
Let's move into the next big category, attitude towards social objects. And let's start with gender. This is an area where we often see really strong societal norms, right?
No, absolutely. And the findings reflect that. When asked if girls should drop out for household work versus getting an equal education,
Yeah. What was the split?
private school students and older students were significantly more likely to support equal education, which is good,
Okay.
but generally less so in private schools and among older students, but yes, more present in government schools overall. The study also used visual cues, pictures,
Pictures of what?
men and women in traditional roles versus more egalitarian roles. Woman driving a tractor, man doing dishes, that kind of thing.
Ah, clever. And the responses?
Responses from students, teachers, and parents revealed a range of beliefs. But generally, those in private schools held less traditional views compared to their counterparts in government schools.
So it really underscores the ongoing influence of those traditional gender roles, especially in certain segments of society.
Definitely. While progress is being made, those norms still hold significant sway.
Okay. What about attitudes towards caste? Another incredibly important and often very sensitive social object in India.
Yes. And here, too, we see differences. Beliefs like it's difficult to befriend people from different castes, or that people from your own caste are just naturally more like-minded.
Were those common?
They were more common among government school students and also among younger students.
Right.
Similarly, the idea that your caste actually determines who you can be friends with, that was also more prevalent in those groups.
And teachers and parents.
Their attitudes towards caste-based diversity also showed a pattern. Those in government schools generally showed less positive views compared to those in private schools.
It's a really stark reminder, isn't it, of how deeply embedded caste can be in social attitudes, even from a young age, and particularly within the government school system, based on this data.
It is, yeah.
What about linguistic diversity? India has this incredible tapestry of languages. How do kids feel about that?
Generally, attitudes towards befriending someone who doesn't speak the local language were pretty positive across the board.
That's encouraging.
And things like multilingual school events were viewed favorably too. However,
There's a however.
there is. Government schools in one state, Andhra Pradesh, consistently showed more negative attitudes towards linguistic diversity compared to other states and private schools.
Really? Specifically Andhra Pradesh?
Yes. And interestingly, teacher and parent attitudes in Andhra Pradesh followed a similar, more negative trend on this issue.
Huh. That regional difference really stands out. Needs more looking into maybe the specific dynamics there.
Absolutely. It warrants further investigation.
Okay, moving on to civic sense and citizenship. How did attitudes differ when it came to people's roles and responsibilities in society? Being a good citizen, basically.
Well, take pollution, throwing garbage in rivers.
Yeah.
Government school students, especially younger ones, were more likely to find that acceptable compared to private school students.
Oof. Okay.
But attitudes towards national symbols, like standing for the national anthem, were overwhelmingly positive, pretty much universal respect there.
Good.
Although a small percentage, mainly students, felt it was okay to not be fully attentive during the anthem if, they thought no one was watching.
Typical kid logic, maybe.
Perhaps. Defacing public monuments was generally seen negatively, but there was a gender difference. Boys were more likely than girls to see it as harmless fun. Interesting. And national campaigns, like cleaning drives.
Willingness to participate in initiatives like Swachh Bharat Abhiyan was generally high across the board.
But any regional patterns here? You mentioned Andhra Pradesh before.
Yes, Andhra Pradesh again showed the highest proportion of parents and teachers who held less positive attitudes towards various aspects of citizenship compared to other surveyed areas.
So a strong sense of national pride seems to exist everywhere, but maybe varying degrees of understanding or personal responsibility when it comes to those everyday civic duties. And again, that regional pattern emerging.
Seems that way.
Okay, finally, under social objects, let's look at attitudes towards those who are economically backward.
Right. Students showed more hesitation about befriending someone from an economically disadvantaged background or someone whose appearance was maybe a bit shabby.
What were the reasons for the hesitation?
Interestingly, it shifted with age. Younger students seemed more concerned about what their parents might think potential disapproval.
Older students, though, focused more on the friend's actual family background itself.
And the shabby appearance aspect.
The negative attitude there was often linked to a belief that the person just doesn't take care of themselves, or again, worries about disapproval from parents or even other friends.
So it really reveals the subtle ways socioeconomic status can influence social interactions and perceptions, even among young people. It's not always overt.
Exactly. These factors weave into the social dynamics within schools.
Now, the study also looked at some really crucial beliefs held by teachers themselves, didn't it? Something about expectations.
Yes, exactly. They examined what they called teachers' Pygmalion beliefs.
Pygmalion. Like the myth.
Sort of. It refers to teachers holding lower expectations for students based on factors that shouldn't matter, like their caste, gender, or economic status. Self-fulfilling prophecies, essentially.
And did they find these beliefs?
Alarmingly, yes. They were more prevalent among teachers in certain states. Again, particularly Andhra Pradesh stood out.
What kind of beliefs are we talking about?
A significant percentage of teachers in these regions expressed beliefs like students from certain castes just learn slower, or that boys and girls have inherently different learning abilities, or that students from poor families just lack a supportive home environment for learning.
Wow. That's really concerning.
It is deeply concerning. And because these kinds of beliefs can, unfortunately, lead teachers to not provide the same opportunities or encouragement to all students, it limits potential.
Absolutely. A self-fulfilling prophecy, like you said. Okay, the study also explored students' own beliefs about their abilities, right? Their self-efficacy and how they felt about learning.
Yes, absolutely. And generally, students reported quite a high sense of self-belief in their abilities, academics, extracurriculars, pretty confident overall.
Right.
But this confidence tended to decrease a bit with age, especially for subjects like maths and for understanding really complex concepts.
That happens. What about liking specific subjects, like maths? Any differences there?
Yes, this was interesting. Government school students who said they liked maths often explained it by saying it was easy to solve problems just by memorizing formulas.
Okay, a procedural approach.
Kind of an instrumental approach, yeah.
Mhm.
Private school students, on the other hand, were more likely to say they liked maths because they actually understood the underlying concepts.
A more relational understanding.
Exactly. And that relational perspective also correlated with higher scores in maths.
Fascinating. Any other key differences in learning attitudes?
Yes, contrasting views on the importance of attending school as they got older.
How so?
Government school students increasingly saw physically being in school as crucial for learning as they progressed through grades.
Okay.
Private school students, however, felt more strongly that they could learn effectively from other sources too, not just relying solely on being in the classroom.
Different views on the necessity of the physical school environment.
And one more thing, growth mindset. The belief that intelligence isn't fixed, that you can learn and become smarter.
Right. Crucial for learning.
That growth mindset was significantly more prevalent among private school students, and it was linked to better performance in language and maths.
So, these differing beliefs about how learning works, the value of school itself, they really point to different educational experiences and maybe different priorities emphasized in these systems.
Very much so. They're significant indicators.
Okay. What about how parents feel about all this, their attitudes towards school activities and learning?
Well, parents in both types of schools generally had positive views about extracurricular activities.
That's good.
Although a notable chunk, maybe 20% or so, still preferred their kids focus only on academics. Some even believed reading books outside the syllabus wouldn't actually help grades.
Okay. What about subjects? Did they value subjects differently?
Yes. For English, government school parents often saw its importance for the country as a whole, national progress maybe.
Right.
Private school parents sometimes linked English more to upholding traditions, interestingly.
Traditions. How so?
The report didn't elaborate deeply, but perhaps linking it to established pathways or social norms for maths and science.
Yeah.
Government school parents often prioritized their role in getting into college, the practical outcome,
Makes sense.
whereas private school parents linked maths and science more to national progress, the future of the world, bigger picture stuff.
The different motivations there. Was there an overall difference in parental priorities?
Yes, a key difference emerged. Government school parents were often very focused on children getting good marks. Why? To secure college placements, get good jobs. Very outcome-oriented.
Understandable.
Private school parents, while obviously wanting success, placed a greater emphasis on their children learning with understanding, deeper comprehension of the material.
So different sets of future goals, perhaps, shaping parental attitudes towards what education is for in these different contexts.
It certainly seems that way. Different aspirations, different perceived pathways to success.
And finally, just briefly, what did the study reveal about teacher attitudes towards, say, discipline and technology?
A significant number of teachers, in both government and private schools, really believed in the need for strict discipline.
How strict?
Some even equated effective discipline with students having a degree of fear of the teacher.
Wow, okay. Old school thinking there for some.
Seems like it. Now, technology. Most teachers had a positive view towards using the internet, e-learning apps, things like that in their teaching.
Dope.
But fewer believed that technology could ever fully replace the teacher in the classroom.
So embracing tools, but still valuing the human element.
Exactly. A continued belief in the importance of the teacher's role, alongside accepting these new tools.
Okay, wow. We have covered an enormous amount of ground here, a really detailed look at this whole landscape of attitudes across the Indian education system. If you had to boil it down, what are some of the most significant takeaways for you? Those sort of aha moments that really stick out.
Gosh, several patterns really do stand out, don't they? First, those different perceptions of bad looks and bad student behavior between government and private schools that immediately tells you something about the different social pressures.
Right.
Then, the reasons kids give for choosing friends, especially around academic standing, that highlights different social dynamics, different parental influences maybe.
Uh-huh.
The high acceptance of corporal punishment across the board is, well, it's sobering. And the contrasting views on parental engagement with schools, that homeschool connection,
No, that was stark.
The persistence of biases around gender and caste, even if they vary in intensity, that's obviously critical. And honestly, the existence of those Pygmalion beliefs among some teachers.
Especially in certain regions.
Yes, especially regionally. That raises serious questions about equitable opportunities. And finally, I'd say the different approaches to learning subjects like math and those evolving views on why attending school is important, they really point to fundamental differences in educational values between the systems.
It really paints a picture, doesn't it?
It paints a picture of a really diverse, really nuanced educational landscape in India, shaped by so many social, cultural, economic factors all interacting.
So what does this all mean for you, the listener? Why should you care about these sometimes subtle differences in attitudes?
Well, if we connect this back to you, I think understanding these underlying attitudes gives you a really valuable lens. It helps you see the factors that shape the overall development of children in India, beyond just the academic curriculum.
Right, the hidden curriculum almost.
Kind of. It reveals the social, the cultural undercurrents that influence well-being, social interactions, future paths. And even if you're not directly involved in Indian education, these insights, they show how environment and societal norms impact individual development anywhere, really. It's about how young people form perspectives.
Okay, this definitely raises a really important point to consider as we wrap up. Based on everything we've discussed from these findings, what's one thought-provoking question you'd leave our listeners with? Something for them to really mull over.
Okay. A provocative thought. Given those differing perspectives we saw on the value of attending school as students get older, that contrast between government and private school students especially, how can we ensure continued engagement and, maybe more importantly, a genuine love for learning that lasts beyond the traditional classroom setting for all young people?
That's a really compelling question to sit with. How do we keep that spark alive for everyone? It's clear that this deep dive, as detailed as it was, has only scratched the surface of the incredible amount of information in this study.
Absolutely.
So for anyone listening who wants to explore these fascinating findings in even greater detail, the full report, that 2A 360-degree Attitude Audit.pdf, obviously offers a much, much deeper level of analysis.
Definitely worth a look if you're interested.
Well, thank you for joining us on this incredibly insightful exploration today.
My pleasure.